Hello, everyone. Good day, and welcome to our webinar on Centering Equity and Resilience in School Bus Electrification. My name is Simbiat Yusuff, Member Relations Manager at Fourth, and I will be your moderator today. We have a great panel discussion for you, so stay tuned, and we have some great speakers today. Attendees, we ask that you please be sure to submit all your questions via our attendee chat. We will get through those questions during the Q&A portion of the presentation today. And we will also be sending out the webinar recap, recording, and slideshow after the webinar. So stay tuned. If you miss anything at all, it will all be shared during in the webinar recap. A little bit about Fourth in case you've forgotten in the past 2 weeks or this is your first time joining a Fourth webinar. Fourth is on a mission to accelerate the use of smart transportation. We work in four main focus areas, which are industry development, policy advocacy, consumer engagement, and demonstration projects. Through these four methods, we hope to advance clean and equitable transportation for all. If you would like to learn more about Fourth, our work, some reports we have published, you can find all of that on our website at fourthmobility.org. And we like to use this opportunity to thank our members and sponsors for making this webinar series possible. If you would like to learn more about the Fourth membership program or sponsorship opportunities for these webinars, you can reach out to myself, Simbiat Y at fourthmobility.org. My email is on the screen right now, but it will also be in the webinar recap. So reach out for any questions about the membership and how to support Fourth. We are less than 2 weeks away from the E-Mobility, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Conference, which is happening November 17th through the 18th. If you haven't registered, you want to register for this conference, you want to be there, having the conversation facilitated by Evie Noir and Fourth on driving equity into and best practices into the work we do with transportation electrification. And the link to this conference will be in the chat. Thank you, Crystal. And less than 1 week left, actually, the roadmap call for proposals will be due November 12th, this Friday. If you are waiting on submitting, I advise submit those call for proposals, submit your proposals for breakout session, panel sessions now. You don't want to wait till the last minute and get those in. We will have the information in the webinar recap. If you go on roadmapfourth.org, you can find more information on the session submission. Also, if you're interested in visibility at the conference, the sponsorship overview is currently published. If your organization is looking to make connections and network at the Roadmap Conference in 2022, find the information for sponsorship on the website as well. And now I'm going to introduce our panels. We have such a great panel discussion that we'll be talking about best practices and some current projects leading the way in school bus electrification. We will have panelist Christiane Walker, the energy consultant at the Center for Transportation and the Environment, Joe Wachunas, who is the program manager at Fourth, and Carla Walker was the Director of Environmental Justice and Equity at the World Resource Institute, United States. And before we start the panel today, we have a quick icebreaker for our panelists. I ask my panelists now to please turn on your webcams and unmute your mic and join me on stage for this quick icebreaker question. Attendees, we ask that you please participate in the attendee chat. Our question today, since we're talking about electric school buses, school bus in general, how we get from home to school. What is your favorite, or what was your favorite memory on a school bus, and how could it have been better if it was on an electric school bus. So I would say, Joe, do you want to go first?
Sure. At the time, I wasn't really excited about it, but in high school, I had to ride the bus a long distance to school, and I just remember long afternoons of sitting in the back of the bus and talking with friends. Again, not very exciting at the time, but they're fond memories in retrospect. I think with an electric school bus, it would have been better because it would have been quieter back there and less diesel fumes to breathe in. So.
Thank you, Carla.
I have to say the same thing that Joe said. I remember um, riding to school with a bunch of friends, but I also had a family on the bus, and one of my cousins always brought a big boom box. So there was music on the bus, and yes, it could have definitely been better with electric buses. We wouldn't have been breathing in all of that um, toxic air.
Thank you, Christiane.
So a similar, I guess, benefit would have been the quietness of an electric school bus versus diesel, but mine is a little bit different from everyone else's. We had kind of a rural route that had to go sort of through tight turns and small roads. And at one time, somebody installed a basketball goal at a corner. And so the bus driver would try his hardest not to hit the basketball goal, but everybody on the bus, anytime we got close to it, would be dead silent, waiting to see if he scraped the basketball goal with the bus. And then if he did, it was like an eruption of kids screaming and cheering that he hit the basketball goal. I don't know why. That's my strongest memory of being on a school bus, but that's it.
Yes. Yes, I would say, yeah, connecting with my friends on the school bus. And yes, those are some fun memories growing up. So thank you all. You can all turn off your webcam and mute your mic. Yes. So, as I mentioned, our panelists will highlight lessons learned from pilots project, share examples and strategies to allow the equitable access of electric school buses, and discuss scaling opportunity for electric school buses. And with that, I'm going to pass it along to the first panelist of our webinar today. Christiane, I know I just told you to turn off your webcam. Could you please turn it on and begin your presentation?
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. My name is Christiane Walker, and I am an engineering consultant at the Center for Transportation and the Environment. And I am leading up CTE's electric school bus effort. So for those of you who don't know CTE, we are a 501c3 nonprofit engineering and planning firm. We have a lot of engineers on staff, and we really are strongest in our technical advisement and technical expertise. We have a mission to improve the health of our climate and communities by bringing people together to develop and commercialize clean, efficient, and sustainable transportation technologies. So our focus is really on zero emission transportation and the supporting technologies that go along with that. Our headquarters are in Atlanta, which is where I am, and we have offices in Berkeley, Los Angeles, and St. Paul. So our primary focus is on 4 service areas. You know, we help through the entire life cycle of zero emission technologies. We help people develop prototypes, put demonstration projects together, proof of concept, to the in-between phase when people are starting to deploy their first vehicles and they need to think about how to make that a reality. And then we help people transition their full fleets to zero emission vehicles. So thinking about future planning and different strategies for that. And underlying all of this is our education and outreach effort, including webinars like these. We go and we educate people on technologies, what's available, and what they can do. So we have projects all across the United States. As you can see, there's a strong correlation in California that's sort of leading the effort when it comes to zero emission technologies and advancing the industry. So put a star there to see our school bus efforts we're really excited to see this market starting to take off. So we've got a few projects out here, and we've got a few more on the way. So right now we're working with Albuquerque Public Schools, Stockton Unified School District, Porterville Unified School District, and Redwood City Schools. So we're helping them with a variety of things, from technical advisement, helping them get buses on the road, figuring out what routes they can run, to planning long-term for the full transition to zero-emission vehicles. And then in the case of Stockton, we're putting together a plan to understand how they can charge their full fleet at the lowest cost. So centering our conversations around equity, part of what we believe to be integral in that is the understanding that we may not all be coming from the same place of knowledge. So we like to start with sort of a little electric school bus 101, getting everybody on the same foot as far as technology and what the terms mean. So let's take a look at the two vehicles side by side. A fuel-fired vehicle and a battery electric vehicle. Both have an energy source. The one on the left obviously is gas or diesel. One on the right has a battery. Both have a motor that convert that chemical energy into mechanical energy, and both have a transmission that take that energy and make the wheels turn. So what's really the difference between the two vehicles? The difference is where that energy comes from and how that energy is created. So in these cases, it comes from chemical reactions that release energy. Fuel-fired engines have reactions that occur in a contained, confined space, but those reactions only happen one time. So the byproducts of that reaction need to be physically removed from the space so that another reaction can occur in that space. The chemical reactions that happen with batteries can be reversed and reused in the same space, and it's all contained inside of the battery. So for a battery electric vehicle, it goes forward when the battery's being used, and then it goes backward when the bus is plugged back in, and it recharges the energy. So the byproducts released from the fuel-fired engine, the things that are emitted into the atmosphere are harmful to folks' health, and obviously carbon dioxide is the leading contributor to climate change. So why does this matter in conversations about equity? And to me, this slide sort of embodies why equity matters the most, not only in the fair and equitable distribution of resources in our country, but also thinking about not centering equity can and actually is right now causing people harm. And for me, this is why the conversation of equity is so important. So when we're thinking about and talking about battery electric buses, we can think about the amount of energy available on a bus in terms of kilowatt hours. And so just to relate that to something that maybe we might be more comfortable with, we can think about that in terms of gallons of diesel. So if you have a diesel tank, then you can think about that in terms of kilowatt hours. So kilowatt hours sort of are the same as gallons in the terms in the realm of units. So let's look at what an electric school bus might look like. On a parking lot, you pull up, you're going to buy one, and it says that this electric school bus is a 200 kilowatt hour battery. Okay, this is what we call the nameplate capacity, and that vehicle might have a reported range of 118 miles. Is that a reality, actually, though? And the answer is no. In reality, only about 80% of a new battery can be used. 10% is kept to maintain the overall health and longevity of the battery. At 5%, it doesn't perform like it normally would. And then another 5% on the bottom of that is kept as a safety buffer to prevent any sort of physical damage or harm. So you go from 118 miles to now, in reality, you're looking at 95 miles. And unlike a diesel tank that will be the same size forever, batteries degrade over time. So about 20% degradation, you go from 95 miles to 75 miles. You continue to lose mileage as the battery ages. But thinking about it this way, this is still usable. You can still use it. You can still drive at 75 miles. Even if it continues to degrade, you can still drive it around. It just won't go as far. So how do we put energy back into the bus? Right now there's two options. We've got AC charging, and if you are familiar with the term level 2 charging, AC is level 2 charging. DC charging is level 3 charging. The difference primarily here, AC charging provides a lower power, DC charging provides a higher power. AC charging takes a lot longer to recharge a battery than DC charging does. However, AC chargers can cost about $2,000, and DC chargers cost about, cost a minimum of $20,000. So if you're looking at a 50 kilowatt DC charger, the minimum cost of that is going to be $20,000 versus $2,000 for AC. So when we're talking about schools and their available budgets, it's really important to understand the operations and understand what mix of AC and DC charging a school might need to provide the most cost-effective solution. So again, taking it back to our comparison of electric and diesel, the power output of a 19 kilowatt level 2 charger and what that looks like compared to if you just plugged in a diesel nozzle to a bus and refilled the bus that way. And so as you can see, it's a very large difference of 19 kilowatts compared to an equivalent 70,000 kilowatts. And so what this slide is really telling us is that charging takes time. You can fill up a diesel bus, 15 minutes or whatever, and it's good to go. But filling up a battery electric bus takes a significantly longer amount of time. So we talked a little bit about why equity matters, and I wanted to share some thoughts on what we feel like needs to be done to keep this effort going forward in an equitable way. And as we all know, schools are underfunded, and transportation is at the bottom of that stack typically when they're making decisions about budgeting. So what we really need is separate, dedicated funding for not only the electric buses, but also the charging equipment, the infrastructure construction, technical assistance and planning. We've seen that it's not so straightforward, and it's not such an easy concept, and schools are going to need trustworthy, neutral expertise to help them get through this process. And in addition to that, funding needs to be easy to access. In the vein of equity, schools that need assistance the most probably don't have the resources to go through a complicated grant process to get access to funds. So they're going to need to find a balance in the grant programs that it's easy to access, but also that the funds are going to be used and used well and smartly. And finally, making a plan and prioritizing equity-based funding. It's my personal opinion that communities should decide what equity means for them, and that plans for equity-based funding should come from local communities, and then sort of filter up through the process to decide what gets funded. And finally, just circling back on the point of education, this is going to be a major change for all of us, and we need to make sure that everyone from the top down, the people making the decisions to the people carrying out the plan, to the people like the children in the community that are going to be impacted by these decisions, are informed and aware of what these changes are going to mean for them and how it's going to impact them. And that's all I have. So, I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation, and honestly, I'm really proud to be part of this national effort. So thank you for putting this together and having this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Christiane. And I love the point where you mentioned communities should decide what equity means to them. And just thank you for providing the basis of our conversation and getting us in the intro into the conversation, because this is important. Education is definitely important. This is still a new technology for most of us, and hoping we continue the education aspect. So thank you so much for your presentation
Thank you.
today. Yeah. So next, I'm going to pass it over to our second panelist, Joe. Take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Simbiat. Thanks, Christiane and Carla. Great to be here with everybody today. This is such an important topic. How is equity and resilience, how are they related to school buses and electric school buses? I'll be touching on that high level today, and I'm excited to be sharing the stage with such great panelists as well. I think Christiane helped provide a real level set, but let's look at some of the numbers with electric school buses today. This comes from WRI's count in the summer. We're right around 500,000 school buses. I remember when I first heard that number, I was a little blown away. That's 5 times the amount of transit buses there are. So we have a lot of vehicles that are out on the roads delivering or transporting our children. And the vast majority, 95%, are powered by diesel. And as Christiane alluded to, there's a lot of pollution problems that come through diesel school buses. We'll look at that a little more in depth in just a second. About 5% are powered by propane, and electric. We're just at about over 1,000, according to WRI's count, 1,000 out of 500,000. There's some good news on the way, right? The federal government wants to electrify 20% of school buses in the next 5 years is the goal. So we're talking to get to 100,000 school buses in the next 5 years. The recent infrastructure package that just got passed has $2.5 billion in it exclusively for electric school buses, and then another $2.5 billion for low emission school buses, which could be electric or propane. So $2.5 billion is a good start. One of the current challenges is that electric school buses are 2 to 3 times more than diesel school buses, where diesel school buses cost, 125 to 150,000. Electric school buses are typically between 350 and 400,000. And hopefully we're going to see that price dropping. But just with that $2.5 billion that the federal government allocated through the infrastructure plan, that'll cover, the cost differential of something like 10 to 15,000 electric school buses. So that's good. It'll give us a couple percentage points in our pie, but we need a little bit more radical transformation. And why do we need that transformation? Well, as we are talking about today, there's huge equity implications for electric school buses. We know that studies have shown that cleaner buses lead to higher test scores, less days missed, less student absenteeism, that children are exposed to more pollutants, 5 to 10 times more pollutants on the bus than they are in the surrounding communities. So it's essential that we clean up the way we transport our children, both at a local level and then, of course, with the global crisis of climate change. And we should begin with the students that are impacted the most, and underserved communities. About 60% of students ride the school bus, whereas higher income communities about 45%. So we should begin with those with underserved communities as we electrify school buses. So, we're talking about the equity implications, and what about the resilience component of school buses? We know that these school buses are going to have really large batteries, between 150 and 225 kilowatt hours. So they're big batteries on wheels. And we know that school buses kind of sit around a lot of the time. They transport students about 200 days a year for 6 hours a day, but they're sitting around idling a lot of the time. So a lot of folks are excited about the potential for school buses to serve as a resilience, a tool for resilience. And I just wanted to do a little bit of our thinking at Fourth and others on how we might use these school buses for resilience. So we like to divide the potential steps for using school buses for resilience purposes into 3 steps. Step number 1 is just electrifying your fleet. And right now, as we talked about earlier, there's 1,000 electric school buses. If we bring it home locally to our state of Oregon, where Fourth is based, we have 5 electric school buses out of 6,000. So we're talking very small numbers. So step 1 is just working with schools and transportation directors and districts to electrify fleets. And there's a lot of work to do. There's a lot of education. There's a lot of myth busting. There's a lot of planning of routes, installing chargers. And so this work has to happen. And all of the great orgs on this call, as well as other orgs, are working tirelessly to get this step 1 happening, where we're transitioning to electric school buses. Then on kind of this 3 steps to resilience, step 2 would be what we call vehicle to grid charging, V2G. And this is where we start to access some of that the energy stored in the big batteries of school buses. So there's a lot of excitement about being able to use that energy when the school bus is not using it, and help power the electrical grid when the electrical grid needs it. So in the ideal scenario, a school bus would charge during off-peak times that there's not a lot of demand on the electrical grid. And then during times when the school buses are finished conducting the routes, or they're sitting there over the summer, they would be able to send some of their energy back to the grid and power and help balance the grid. And there's a lot of resilience elements in this. I was talking with Jackie Pirro at Nuvi last week, and grids can go down if there's too much demand. We've seen that in California and Texas and other places. And sorry if my video is paused there a second. And so if we had access to these, hundreds of thousands of big batteries during peak times, school buses could potentially, and other vehicles as well, could potentially power the grid and prevent it from going down. So that's a huge aspect of resilience that maybe we don't even think about. So that's step 2, powering a vehicle to grid, and we're seeing that in a couple handfuls. So if cutting edge is step 1, we're trying to get school buses into the hands of districts. That's step 1, and it's cutting edge. Bleeding edge is vehicle to grid. We're almost off the tip of the knife there. There's only a handful of projects doing vehicle to grid. One in Beverly, Massachusetts, just came out, and they used 1 school bus to power the grid in Massachusetts. And they just released some data in October. Over the summer, there were 30 events where they pulled electricity from the grid and helped power the grid. And they got about 3 megawatt hours out of that bus, just 1 single bus. And 3 megawatt hours is a lot of energy for 1 bus. So it showed some of the future potential of electric school buses for vehicle to grid. And so if that's step 2, step 3, we might call this resilience potential, where school buses could power a building during an outage. And this is off the bleeding edge. This is something that's not technically feasible yet. And this is something that at Fourth and with our partners that I'll talk about in just a second have been looking into. So in this idea, school buses could be charged by hopefully renewable energy, as you can see here on this bus depot. And then during an outage, these school buses could be transported to a community resilience hub, where they would power that hub during an outage. Their batteries would be used to power the building. And so I'll go back to that slide. With 2 partners here in Portland, we received a Portland Clean Energy Fund grant last year, and have been working on it this year to kind of explore this possibility. Our partners are Hacienda Community Development Corporation, and then Allison Wiley with the Electric Bus newsletter. And with our 2 partners, we kind of identified a couple resilience hubs. This is Las Adelitas. It's a new affordable housing community development being built. And as well as Bybee Lakes Hope Center. It's a center that serves people experiencing homelessness. And so we're exploring installing solar panels, stationary energy storage, so batteries that don't move, that are there, and as well as school buses was our initial thought. But some of the problems that we ran into, and again, we're off the bleeding edge with this one, is that one, the technology isn't there yet. Chargers and school buses can't work if the grid is down. So we're hopeful that this will be able to happen soon, but it's just not possible yet. And then the other barrier that we ran into is that school districts are really, their mindset is in step one. They're trying to transfer their fleets to electric, and having a difficult time with that and wrapping their minds around that. And our team was talking to them about, hey, then could we borrow your school buses to power a center during an outage? And that felt like a stretch for them. That was way down in step three. So as school buses are transitioning, and as we're working from step one to step two with vehicle to grid, and then step three to vehicle to building and powering a building, we at Fourth and with our partners want to work closely with school districts to get them to that point. And in the meantime, we're exploring using other vehicles like shuttle vehicles to get to step three a little bit sooner, where we can actually power a building with a battery. So stay tuned on that as we work to make step three a reality, and look forward to hearing your thoughts and hearing from the other panelists.
Thank you so much, Joe, for your presentation and covering resiliency. And I see there's a lot of questions already coming in for our panelists. Please keep them coming, and we will get to them during the Q&A portion of the webinar. And now I would like to pass it over to our third and final panelist, Carla Walker from the World Resource Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, Simbiat. And thanks to the team at Fourth. It's great to be here with my co-panelists, Christiane and Joe. I'm Carla Walker, and as the U.S. Director of Environmental Justice and Equity at WRI, I advance and expand WRI US's portfolio in this space, and I get a chance to work with the Electric School Bus Initiative team to ensure that project centers equity and leads with intersectionality in its operations and its outcomes. So before I kind of walk you through how we've organized that project to focus on equity, I just want to do a high-level overview of WRI for folks who may not be familiar. WRI is a global network that works across 12 country offices to develop sustainable solutions around 7 major challenges: cities, climate, energy, food, forest, water, and oceans. And we analyze challenges and develop those solutions through the lenses of 4 centers of excellence: finance, economics, business. And earlier this year, we launched our Equity Center, which focuses on building an equitable, resilient, and sustainable future. And so in the US office, we work across federal, state, local, corporate, and also community levels. And so our Electric School Bus Initiative focuses on 3 goals. We want to make sure that we are partnering with communities, school districts, manufacturers, utilities, industry experts, to make sure that we are equitably transforming the school bus market. Together, we are working towards building unstoppable momentum to electrify those 480,000 plus school buses that Joe was talking about. And our target timeline is by 2030. And then finally, we want to make sure that we are ensuring an equitable transition by focusing on underserved school districts. And so we know that transportation is responsible for almost 30% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. And also, those school buses represent less than 1% of the U.S. transport emissions. They are an important symbolic step in the EV transition. They give children an experience with e-mobility at an early age and can help enable broader infrastructure and industry changes. So school bus electrification then brings direct, tangible benefits to every community in the U.S. And has immediate consequences for our children's health. And here are just a couple of examples of some of the health impacts that some of my other colleagues have mentioned. But we also know that communities are not impacted equally. As you see here, 70% of students riding school buses are low income, and particulate matter exposure from on-road sources can be significantly higher in communities of color. And these are just some of the burdens that are inequitably distributed. So the inequitable distribution of harms and benefits does not stop with health. And so to create a project that centers on equity and leads with intersectionality, equity needs to be the foundation and the goals across all the work streams, right? So the way that we have crafted our ESB project is that working along with partners, we plan to deliver outcomes across 5 major interconnected areas. We call them pillars. The first is to aggregate, demand, and drive mass procurement of electric buses, bringing the electric bus industry to a tipping point of mass adoption. So we'll be working with school districts and partner organizations and community groups to help support the development of local electric bus transition plans. Secondly, we'll be scaling e-bus manufacturing, working with OEMs and manufacturers to catalyze innovative business models. Third, developing innovative utility and private sector financing models and support smart charging infrastructure development and deployment. Fourth, influencing federal and state policy to unlock public funding and policy support for full electrification of school bus fleets, building on recent momentum for electrifying diesel vehicles. And fifth, supporting and galvanizing communities and stakeholders for an equitable and comprehensive shift towards e-buses by 2030. And so to help build that just transition, we'll be focusing on centering schools and their communities, raising national awareness, and implementing innovative engagement across all layers of the project. And so a just transition to ESBs could help make more equitable, healthier electric mobility a new norm for an entire generation, while also contributing a small but important piece in the puzzle of accelerating transportation and transport decarbonization. So we recognize that there are equity intersections at play and connections across all of the pillar stakeholder sectors. And this matrix here highlights a few of the examples or a few of the ways in which that might be the case in each pillar. And our approach to centering equity means that the project runs equitably from top to bottom. And so I'll offer an example, right? Let's talk about procedural justice, which ensures fairness in process, not just outcomes, right? Our manufacturer steering committee, which we plan to create, would not successfully engage in procedural justice without meaningful contributions from NGOs or groups that are actually engaging in just transition work. So procedural justice doesn't just mean extending invites or asking for input. It requires respect, trust, equal voice, and unbiased decision making. And so we are intentionally incorporating those voices, those perspectives on that committee. But we also are identifying and designing solutions to avoid pitfalls, right? So like, for example, electric school buses tend to require less maintenance than diesel models. Widespread adoption could result in the loss of traditional vehicle maintenance jobs. So we're trying to make sure that we're thoughtful about how to address those concerns. Another example is, diesel school buses don't just disappear. When decommissioning school buses, we need to consider how are we disposing of them so we do not so that they do not continue to produce toxic air pollution and contribute to unsafe road conditions. So how do we do that in practice, right? So we've employed and we have 3 strategies that we work on across our work. First, for each pillar you saw in that earlier slide, we have placed an equity point of contact on each of those teams. Those point of contacts work directly with those teams in developing strategies. They have a focused view on how to identify distributional, procedural, and process equity concerns. And then we're tracking all of those equity intersections from the development of work plans to the implementation of those strategies and any of the events that we are working with to the development of documentation and how we present that material. Secondly, because equity should not be the responsibility of just the equity team, we are also building the capacity of that broader ESB team to rethink the way that they should respond to practices, policies, and systems within that pillar sector. So I call this building our equity muscle, hence the picture there. And so we need to know more than how to just use the terminology and language. So what we're doing is creating this internal community of practice that builds the competence, understanding, and knowledge of our team to sharpen critical thinking and problem solving skills, to implement the project justly and equitably, both internally and externally. And these are 1-hour sessions once a month with our ESB team that cover a variety of topics and are presented by national thought leaders on equity, environmental justice, mobility, and transit. And finally, as we do all of that, we are also focusing on developing our long-term strategy of developing an equity framework for this project that helps guide overall decisions in all of the following years. And while we are tracking all of our equity intersections and our connections during this first operational year, we're developing that framework to help with organizing definitions, values, norms of operating. We're working with our project advisory council, who will be helping us kind of fashion equity principles for the project. But we're also working to complete our analysis on the historical drivers of inequity in the ESB ecosystem. And we expect to complete that work by mid next year. And finally, I share this slide to give a shout out to all of our partners and those that we're working with in collaboration, a number of community and national partners who have already been significantly contributing to the ESB space and have been working on driving equitable transition across ESBs for years. And so I'm really excited about joining this panel, but also equally excited about joining this project and working on the transition of ESBs to electric. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you all. And with that, we're entering our Q&A section. So I invite all of the speakers to please turn on your camera and unmute your mics. Thank you so much for the presentation so far. We have a lot of questions. So I want to start with because I saw some questions about just current challenges, current barriers. So I would like to open up the discussion with what are current challenges, deterrent for school districts to transition to all electric. Is it workforce development? Is it the funding? Those play parts, but what are the, from your project or from the work you're doing, what are we seeing are the deterrents from the school districts?
I think the major challenge, I mean, there are a number of them, but the major challenge is funding. And I think Christiane mentioned this in her presentation. School districts are saddled with a number of issues, and the current pricing for electric school buses is it does not allow for school districts to easily make that transition, because diesel buses are much cheaper. So you have to have a really strong argument and money behind that argument for school districts to kind of move in this direction.
Thank you, Joe. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I would absolutely second that. I think funding and the cost differential between a new electric school bus and a new diesel school bus is the major barrier. Hopefully this new infrastructure funding will help that for a lot of school districts, and hopefully the price will come down. I've talked with some school bus manufacturers, and I'm like, why is the bus so much more expensive? And their standard line is because they're not at scale yet. They're not producing these at scale. So hopefully that will with all of our work to promote electric school buses, the price will naturally come down. I'll say quickly too, there are challenges with transportation directors not understanding the technology, having to rethink the way that they're fueling and charging their school buses and the routes that they're going to be taking. And so working kind of hand on hand with the 13,000 school districts out there is going to be crucial work over the next coming years.
Christiane, do you have anything to add, or?
No, I think they summed that up pretty well. I think the primary concern is funding right now. We've seen a lot of support for and a lot of desire to transition to electric school buses. We just need the funding to do it.
Yeah, thank you. Our next question, this was directed to you, Carla. How do you think we can learn from our international colleagues on school bus electrification?
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks for that question. I think there are a number of examples out there that might lend themselves toward creativity and innovation, where we might be able to learn from some of our international, from cities across the globe that have decided to move in this along that electrification pathway. And I would say, yeah, definitely. I mean, this is just like looking at cities that are and school districts that are taking this challenge on across the US. I mean, I think there are dozens of best practices. And one of the things that I think is interesting in terms of, just relating it to the previous question, education and finding out that if you're a school district that's interested in, or community that's interested in going electric, you don't have to start from scratch, and you're not alone in this idea that you want to move in this direction. So I think definitely from the international perspective, you can look at a number of cities, but that doesn't mean that those things are not also happening here across the US.
Thank you. And when we speak, Carla, I know you mentioned this in your presentation about procedural justice, making sure the community is involved. And Christiane, you mentioned in your presentation. So there was a question about how best to bring community voices to the table and have meaningful participation. So if we could expand more on inviting the community in, inviting their voices, and inviting them to participate meaningfully, and compensation for their time, or that aspect. Could we speak more on that? And Joe, I can have you go first since we already heard a little from Carla and Christiane.
Sure. Yeah. A couple thoughts. In our planning project, we've done a lot of community surveying, and we found that electric transportation is very popular, and the people and the communities we surveyed want it and want to have it soon. We also do believe in compensating for the time, and we do provide gift cards for folks who are willing to share their time with us by completing surveys. And then I just want to also say that as far as the community aspect goes, the really exciting thing about electric school buses is that they create this whole learning opportunity in schools. I've talked to transportation directors that are then working with science classes to really study the electric school buses, and kids are getting so excited that they're naming their electric school buses. And so there's just really a lot of learning opportunities as we transition to cleaner fuels.
Christiane, anything else to add, Carla?
I think this is it's an important topic, and I think it's really hard to define, actually, and putting together plans and who to engage with and where do those plans come from. And a lot of it, is local organization and regular people getting involved, and sort of self-advocating for what they want to see in their community, or who they want to see represented and why. It's incredibly important, and I think, as a nation, I think we're still on the cusp of figuring out what that means and what that looks like in a meaningful way. So think it's still largely a big question mark, but I think it's becoming more and more the center of conversations, which is really important.
Yeah, I just want to add, I echo the comments from Joe and Christiane. I want to say too that it's equally important to involve those communities in the decision making, and this is something that gets done from the very beginning, and it is not something that should be an afterthought. I think Christiane, you had mentioned in your presentation, you like to make sure that the communities are helping to define what equity means to them. And I think in terms of developing plans for transitioning to electric school buses, it's incumbent, if you're going to do it with that community engagement, that it's involving those individuals, involving those community organizations, who those representatives are, involving them from the very beginning, but more deeply having them at the table with making decisions about what that looks like, definitely compensating them, but also listening to what they have to say, because they have a level of expertise that we may not, as folks coming in from different organizations nationally, what have you, we don't have that local expertise. And that's a very valuable piece of the puzzle that sometimes is missing in the placement of and location of depots and what needs to happen with the routes, et cetera, and so forth. Like those things need to be a part of the decision of how these plans are made.
Thank you. Joe, this question is directed towards you. How can we incentivize school districts to embrace the implementation of V2G? I know you covered V2G in your presentation. I believe you're on mute, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, there are some creative ways to do it, and I'd love to hear what Christiane thinks on this topic as well as Carla. We are seeing the largest electric school bus sale to date is in Maryland with 320 something buses for a Maryland school district, and it's through a provider called Highland Electric, and the school district doesn't have to worry about V2G, doesn't have to worry about procuring the electric school buses. This third-party entity is going to be providing all the school buses, all the charging, and incorporating vehicle to grid. And the school district will just pay a monthly or by mile fee to Highland Electric. So it kind of simplifies things for the school district. So those models are really exciting and creative, and other companies are doing it as well. So that could be one way to help districts wrap their minds around the complexity of vehicle to grid and not have to worry about it.
Anybody have anything else to add to that before we get to the next question?
I think vehicle to grid is, it's an interesting concept, and it's still really, really early in its infancy of development and practicality. I'd be interesting. I think we've got a study that we're doing in Stockton to better understand the financial benefits of vehicle to grid. I certainly think that there's strong benefits, especially in the summer months, for resiliency in supporting the grid needs during the operational year. It may look a little bit less promising because of the need of the school districts to actually be charging and not discharging. I think it's going to be really important for resiliency and understanding how schools can benefit from that.
Thank you. I think we have time for two more questions. So I'm going to ask one on what's the role of utilities in this conversation with electric school buses. I saw some questions about utilities, time of use rates. What are we seeing in this discussion, in the discussions with school districts on electric school buses? Are we bringing in utilities to the table and having that discussion with them? Carla, do you want to take this first, and then we go Joe and Christiane?
So utilities will be key financial and technical partners for accelerating, ESB deployment, and so electrifying the entire school bus fleet can unlock, I think, what's the number? 72 gigawatt hours of storage via vehicle to grid utilities, enable new opportunities to expand businesses, and integrate clean energy. And so they're a key partner in this, which is one of the reasons why they're one of the major pillars and major stakeholder pillars for the work that we're doing for our electric school bus initiative.
Yeah, and just to speak kind of locally from where we see Pacific Power in the state of Oregon funded the Electric Bus Learning Project to educate districts around the state. And then our local utility, PGE, has been heavily involved in electric school buses. They have a clean fuels funding directly that goes to school districts to help pay that cost differential, which is so key, and has really helped districts get the first electric school buses in the state. PGE is also doing the first vehicle to grid pilot in Newberg, Oregon right now, and the charger's just going in the ground. So utilities are really key in pushing this industry forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So something that we're seeing, there's going to have to be a massive expansion of the grid itself and the available energy. What we're seeing from schools is a little bit different than what we've seen in transit markets, where you can do a level of charge management where you can minimize the peak demand that you need during a period. For schools, it's not that straightforward. It's all of the vehicles in most cases need to be charging at the same time, which is a massive demand ask from the grid on the order of megawatts per parking lot, which is huge. So utilities are going to be key to helping us figure out, especially for electric school buses, how to get that much energy available.
Thank you. And then for our final question, I'll go with Christiane first, and Carla, then Joe. We have our attendees on the webinar today. What can our attendees do to help move school bus electrification further?
So I think one of the most important things that people can do is to get involved and to push forward on legislative engagement and making sure that things are getting put into place, especially in an equitable way. But we need people to be engaged in their legislation and get more laws, get more grants, get more funding, just to be engaged. Organize yourselves and get out there and ask for what you want.
I can't second that more. I mean, that right there that's major. We need as much help as we can to push the policy levers on this. It helps unlock a number of things, and the more folks we have out there calling and contacting your legislators, not just at the congressional level, but also at the state level, it's critically important.
And I'll be a broken record and say the same thing. Except I would also add that the engaging on even a grassroots level at your local school district is really key. We've been in conversations with. There's transportation directors at school districts are all over the spectrum. Some are really into the electrification and see it as the future and want to be, buying electric school buses left and right. Others are a little bit more reticent. But when there's pressure from parents and the school board and superintendents and folks are hearing that, hey, we want clean buses to drive our kids around, then, if you do have a transportation director that's dragging their feet, they'll say, all right, I'll take a look at these electric school buses. So if they can get pressure from the top, funding from above, pressure from below, funding from above, that could be a good recipe to electrifying more quickly.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. A big appreciation to our panelists today, Joe, Carla, and Christiane, for joining the presentation and talking to us about the 101 to building equity and then to resilience with the electric school buses. So I really appreciate you all joining us for this conversation. And thank you to my colleague, Crystal, for her help in the background helping us keep us on time and getting everything ready to go for us. Before we sign out today, we do have one poll question for you all. And the poll is, did you find this webinar informative? Just let us know so we can keep bringing you engaging topics. Throughout our next season, and we're already planning the 2022 calendar, so we want to know what information to cover. Thank you so much for joining us and spending this hour with us. As a reminder, we will be sharing all of the webinar recaps, the recording, as well as the slides to you all shortly after the webinar. So if you have any questions, please stay tuned for that. And we hope you can join us next week for the business case for workplace charging, happening at 10 a.m. Pacific time next Tuesday. We'll be discussing the business case of workplace charging, focusing on information from different best practices that are happening in different projects leading workplace charging. And we want to say thank you to that webinar sponsor, Idaho Power. So thank you so much for joining us. We hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.